Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, Tom. How are you today?
Doing okay. We have our friend and colleague, Jake Kim, with us, someone
Yes,
we've
we
known
do.
for a number of years, who is an esteemed graduate of Columbia University. And he was well instructed because he was instructed, obviously, by Professor Silberstein there. I will take slight credit for that too, but anyway, he's been under the tutelage of the better of the two of us, I would say. Don't you, Jake?
Of course.
Yes, we
I
have to
saw the
say yes.
hesitation there.
Good morning, professors.
Yeah, really. Well, it's a pleasure to see you, Jake. We see you fairly frequently because we love what you're doing, and we thought we'd take a moment on the Deep Business Daily to just have you tell us about what you're doing and why, and what's it like to build a tech company these days? What's it like to build from the West Coast in the center of technology? And your history of how you got there, and what your background is, and the marketplace you're dealing with. So all of the typical questions that we deal with in these kinds of things. So, I'll start out with just saying, Jake, what is it? What is the problem or the opportunity that you saw in the marketplace, or you see, that you are working to close, the gap you're working to close?
Sure, yeah. First of all, thank you for having me on your podcast. It's really great, going from being one of your students and taking the idea I developed in your class to the real world. So, really happy to be here. The strategic gap we identified in one of the classes at Columbia was as an engineering manager at Apple, what I realized is when we're hiring, there's a lot of solutions for recruiters, but not enough solutions for engineering managers and their teams. And the recruiter side of the market is huge, multi-billion-dollar market. But on the other hand, tools we relied on as managers were Excel sheets and a lot of meetings. So that's the gap we identified and that we set out to solve.
Deirdre, do you have any questions you'd like to ask Jake as he unfolds this?
Yes, Jake, talk a little more about what hiring was like and what your experiences as a hiring manager led you to conceive this project.
Sure. So I always thought of hiring as the most important activity of any organization. And I had this thought ever since I was an engineer, because I knew as a high performing engineer myself, it's very easy to get demotivated when your manager, for instance, is careless about who they're hiring as your next teammate, right? So my mind was set that if I become a manager, I'm gonna do it right. And as soon as I became a manager, I was really passionate and I wanted to follow all the best practices in hiring. I wanted to make sure we're really thinking carefully about who we're bringing on, uh, and that my engineers felt like they are a part of the process. Um, and initially, I feel like I did my best to really manage this process. But the tools I had available were just Excel, shared Excel sheets where I would have to invite every engineer for every role, for every candidate, and try to kind of collaborate on what questions we need to ask as a team. Um, and then uh, you know, and then I would have to follow up with them before their interviews to let them know, hey, like this is what we agreed on. These are the questions you said you're going to ask. But the whole process was so time consuming to do right. And but when I started looking into how recruiters were handling this situation from their end, because they were targeting, their business, they're in the business of sourcing candidates. They had everything automated on their end, and they were frustrated that teams were taking so long to set up interviews and be ready to accept the candidates, right? So that's the huge gap that I saw. We were wasting countless hours in productivity, just to do hiring right. And I saw this problem all across Apple, and managers, even the best ones, would eventually become disillusioned by the whole process.
So Jake, if we take a second and talk about the elements that you identified when you said, I wanted to do it differently as a hiring manager, and you said, there are certain things I want to do, and I'm going to construct a hand-built tool based on Excel to do this. So describe, what were those elements of the hiring process that you thought were lacking? And you're talking about, and let me just make sure I've got this right. You're talking about high quality, highly skilled technical skills being brought in as engineers into a high-tech software design area, right? Software solution area. So when you're talking about hiring those people and matching them up with your needs as a hiring manager, specifically in this case, you were at Apple, what was it that you were missing there, Jake? And that what was the enterprise system not giving you, the sourcing side not giving you in that process that you needed to have, that you felt was going to help everybody make a better decision on the people they hired?
So there's a few components to it. The first one is the cultural aspect. So every company has a culture that they want to reinforce through the hiring process. At Apple, it's things like delighting customers, putting customers first. Amazon, it's frugality, doing more with less. Every company has a set of cultures that they want to reinforce in their hiring process. That's one component. The other one is tech jobs are becoming ever more complicated and complex. Previously, you were hiring for a front-end engineer, but even a front-end engineer's job is so segmented right now that you can be a front-end engineer that is excellent in prototyping versus a front-end engineer who's excellent in optimizing. And being able to know exactly who you're looking for in your team is important. So imagine if you're putting together a baseball team, it would be important to know that you have people who are, I don't know, better as basemen, right? First, second, third baseman, and then you have a missing gap in your, pitching staff, right? It's really important to identify the skill sets you already have in your team and say, hey, these are the skill sets I'm looking for specifically, not just in title, right? But from the candidate. So when you have for managers who have a really good idea of their team, what they're looking for, you need to come up with a plan to say, how am I going to know, right? When we take a candidate through a series of interviews, that this candidate is the best fit for my team. And we do that by, coming up with the right questions as a team. And if you have a series of 5 interviews, you want to make sure that you don't want to end up in a situation where all 5 interviewers ask the same question. You want to or you don't want to end up in a situation where these interviewers ask wrong questions, like, hey, like, what's your favorite beer? Like, how do you like your coffee? Or make decisions based off of how well the conversation went, right? So it's really important to have a structured interview processes. But like I mentioned, I looked everywhere in the market. I looked in how people are doing it in different companies, and most companies, actually all of the companies that I interviewed, do it on some sort of a shared document and series of meetings and across multiple tools, which I guess to kind of you know, the final piece that kind of made me really convinced is in our class, right? We were doing research on this. We took a deep dive into this subject, and we found a lot of research papers out there that really proved that actually this team aspect of hiring is the costliest piece of the hiring equation. And that's, like, sourcing takes us some part, but the hiring piece has the potential to grow exponential, but because it's a hidden cost, and because it's so important to teams, a lot of companies just take it as a, fact of life.
Deirdre?
Jake, I'm wondering, before we go further, to build in a little bit of explanation, you have talked with Professor Cowan and me about the software competition in your marketplace, or the software that is used in parts of the hiring process. Why hasn't there been software developed commercially that does exactly this thing? Tell us a little bit about what sorts of software are available and why you're feeling the need to develop your own program.
Sure. Yeah. I think that, okay, to kind of preface it a little bit with a little bit of context, I the technology sector, we think of it as, like, it's been around forever, but in a larger context, it's only been, decades, right? And enterprise software has only been, for a couple of decades, right? And the model of selling software, I think started out as, selling in big bulks into a single company, and that's usually done by procurement. Then it was done by, HR, IT, right? And the whole HR industry, I think, grew to this 30-something billion dollar industry over the last, 1 decade. And there's still a lot of opportunity there. So I think it has a lot to do with how the selling of software developed in this industry. And because, like, there was a lot of opportunity in HR, the first solutions in this problem segment came in the form of HR solutions, and targeted, the needs of recruiters who had the need to source candidates. It's very easy to fix. You just automate their processes. And the same players who were targeting recruiters and HR needs were like, oh, this problem seems in the same realm, right? It's in the hiring process, so we want to tackle this problem. So there have been companies like Greenhouse that, like, are big in the HR, the sourcing side. that try to introduce structured interviews into the process and like inviting people onto the platform. But they're going about it completely wrong because they don't understand the managers and teams' needs at all. We're not their primary customers. It's like when the movie theater business tried to add reclinable seats to compete with Netflix. And so I think traditional players who have successfully captured this sourcing side of the market are trying to get into this problem space, but are failing to do so. We think actually this is a team side problem, and whoever solves this will needs to be positioned as a team productivity software that helps teams in other ways to save them time and resources.
So Jake, this gets back to something we've talked about for all the way back into when you were studying with us, is that enterprise software, for the most part, is a structured software system. It's built around rule-based software, which it needs to be, because we need to be able to take the results and count it and reconcile it. And so it's a rule-based approach, and it's really valuable, and especially now when one of the major pushes on HR is compliance, and making sure that there's an element of compliance in what's going on, and that aspects are properly documented for compliance aspects, because they sometimes can pose a large risk, even existential to organizations. So we understand that. So it's a needed thing, and it's valued not just by, these days, not just by the function of HR, but also by the leadership of the corporation, that it does have that structure. But I believe what I've heard you say to us, and we have the benefit, obviously, of having worked with you on this for a while now, but what you're seeing is the need for exactly the opposite. You need the free form ability to provide, to adapt to the hiring managers that you're working with, but be able to interface with that structured information. So this is where many of us believe that the real value in software is coming, and going to be coming, is in this providing the flexibility of the less rule-based, but interfacing back to the rule-based, so that the rule-based gets what they need and they don't fight you, right? They actually encourage you, because I think one of the things that you've identified, I don't think it, I know it, is that there's a large breakage in productivity, and it comes in two forms. One is it comes in the form of not hiring precisely enough for exactly what you need. That's breakage one. And breakage two is the actual hiring process that you will go through to make sure you do get the right people. It's just, how difficult is it, and how much breakage does it take, not only in your time as a hiring manager, but also in people's time as they are helping along, your people as they're helping along this process. And what that is the nub, I think, of what you have seen, and you see as not just a problem, but an opportunity, because it provides a huge opportunity for unseen productivity breakage in an organization in critical places, right? Isn't that? So if I were going to get down to, okay, what you're seeing is a breakage of productivity of highly skilled, highly valued labor, or capability, breakage in that capability's productivity. And that's what you're solving. It happens to be oriented towards tech talent at the moment in software engineering, but it could be board members, it could be senior leaders, it could be anything that has high value talent, that the breakage in hiring correctly is there today. And it's just a matter of, it's not as obvious, because we do need those structured systems that ultimately have to manage these processes for us. I think you've also said to us, and rightfully so, because we've been involved in some of these companies, that the structured side of HR has gone through, at least that I know of, two major phases of improvement in their technology. The original systems brought to you by PeopleSoft, and then the newest version, and I'm just using PeopleSoft as coming out of the really not very structured to the function, but PeopleSoft was really the one many know, into the Workday kind of thing today, which is the moving it from on-premise large systems to the web-based SaaS applications. So, but in that process, Jake, I think what I've heard you say is that to come back is that it still doesn't deal with the breakage that I, as an engineering manager, not only did I experience and have I experienced, and would I be experiencing if I had stayed on my position at Apple, but that is a shared experience by almost every engineering manager in a large tech company, and probably in not just large, but small to medium, because I believe some of your potential customers and some of your customers are coming from that, right? So spend a second now. Did I describe that properly?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it's I'll take a little bit of a moment to collect my thoughts.
I couldn't be asking that deep a set of questions, Jake, on you. That's just not part of the game. But
Right, so
spend a second and collect your thoughts. We all do that. You see me, you know what I'm thinking, because I'm staring up at the corner of the sky, right? So, Deirdre, while Jake is collecting his thoughts on the subject, what do you have to add to this discussion about the market, the opportunity, the problem, what are you seeing? I mean, you played in the same enterprise companies I've played in, and so forth.
Right. I think you've gotten at it fairly well, that the enterprise systems are made for the enterprise, and they're made for record keeping, for making sure that you do meet regulations, that you do what you're supposed to do, and then they all interface. But frequently, such systems aren't of use to the people who are actually doing the work, having to accomplish things. And this is the impetus for Jake going out and building his product. I remember when you and I really started to get Jake to define his product, he literally drew a path for the path of hiring, and how there was no intersection in the software available and used by HR systems that would allow him to follow the path that he follows in the hiring process, so that there was a need for this software. And in effect, when Jake is talking about sourcing, what he means is that, yes, HR may go out and find people, but at that point, their capabilities end. And there's a gap there between finding people to interview and then taking them through the interview process and the hiring process and then onboarding them and so forth. And that gap is where Jake is playing. So I'm just reiterating and strengthening the impression that listeners get that there are these corporate systems, enterprise systems, that are very rigid by necessity, but then jobs that are not rigid like that need their own solutions. And now I think Jake has gathered his thoughts. So take
So, yeah, that's
we kind
a
of know you,
great.
Jake. We kind of know how you are, and it comes with that deep mind you have.
Yeah, I mean that is a great summary, and I think I wanted to kind of collect my thoughts, because I always have like these like I've thought a lot about this in very deep ways. So I often try to figure out at what level, like I want to explain. But I think we're talking in kind of a larger picture, right? Like what's happening in the industry. So um, definitely there's enterprise software has, come has, gone through multiple stages. Everyone is accustomed to SaaS, and even SaaS is being sold in bulk to specific functions. But there has been, Slack being an example, SaaS, some products that teams elected first because they needed to get stuff done, right? And that didn't quite fit into any of the previous company functions. And I think this organizational breakage is one of them, because we used to think that's the job of HR, but HR isn't really equipped to know the day-to-day needs of individual teams. Companies are getting bigger and bigger, right? Roles are getting more and more complex. Teams are doing very, very technical things, and it's really unreasonable for us to expect your recruiter to know exactly what your team is doing, what kind of a person you need to hire, right? Because that's evolving. And we have developed a very unique way to, with software, map out and label different clusters of work in your organization so that we can automate this process for your team, right? And this can be useful in solving this exact strategic gap. And we feel like the next steps for us is, instead of focusing on HR cases, we want to, use this capability to help teams do better, right? Fix other organizational breakages.
Yeah. Deirdre?
Yeah, before we move away from the HR space, Jake, I think it's time for you to actually describe your product. Describe what your product does. Start with approach and then start to talk about functionality and how you see people using your product. But stay focused on the HR part, and then we'll go all over the place in the organization.
Sure. Yep. So we are starting out as solving the problem that I personally faced at Apple, right? And that's the whole part of, when you get a headcount, you need to define the role in the form of a job description, and then send it out to the recruiter. And at the same time, in parallel, you need to build out a structured interview, right? And we leverage large language models to assist you in the defining of the role, so you know what kind of things you could consider, including your own projects and the jobs out there in the world. And we leverage large language models in coming up with the questions that you can be asking in the interviews, as well as retrieving questions from the technical questions bank. So putting this together, we are taking the job description definition to structured interviews, interviewer finding, all of that process from weeks to seconds.
Yes, and one of the hardest parts I always thought, and I still think to this day, and Deirdre, I don't know what you think, but coming up with a job description was one of the hardest things I think you do, because many of us who don't do it very often, it's a hard thing to get started with. And then even coming up with prospective interview questions for a hire, if you are a senior leader of an organization, and in watching your product or observing your product and seeing the demo that you do and so forth, it's made it just dead simple to do. And the interface that you have is a very user-friendly interface that is not intimidating at all, and it itself doesn't take any learning above just using your phone almost to be able to use this, which is a tremendous benefit, because I don't mind learning applications, but I think until software gets as easy as driving a car, for the most part, it's still a little too hard. But you've taken all that, and through the use of powerful technology, made it easy to develop. And the other thing that I've seen you do, Jake, is you consider all the aspects. It's not just the technical requirement, it's the personal characteristics, and then it's the culture you're building, and you've color coded them so that they're that you can even just look and see, okay, what kind of a balance do I have in the way that I've created this model of the job, the person that we're calling a true job description. Have I articulated that properly?
Yeah, we put in a lot of focus in the usability of the product. Customers don't really care about the technologies we're using. Technology is just enabling us. The process needs to be as simple as possible, as little steps as possible. We really focus to get the main workflow right, because we feel like by solving this major problem, which is costing the company hundreds of thousands of dollars in engineering productivity per role, that translates to translates immediately to how much time engineers are spending and feeling like they're wasting outside of their actual job function, right? So by solving that dread that engineers have, the interviewer fatigue that engineers have, we want to, really establish ourselves as a tool that helps you and your teams from this organizational breakage.
Deirdre?
I'd like to make explicit, you've sort of said this, but for listeners who may not be fully aware of how these interviews happen, that you would be, as the team leader, would be setting the job description and entering it. Then you would have to recruit people from your team, engineers from your team, who themselves would interview each candidate. And this is where a lot of the breakage comes in, that these people using your product would have valid questions that they can select from. They would not be duplicating questions. They can enter their comments directly into your program. You can see, using the visual capabilities of the program, how each candidate stacks up given the sum of the comments of each of the reviewers, so that the final selection is very easy. And it's so the whole process is made easy with the recruiting of the engineers coming up with the questions, the engineers entering their evaluations, and then you as a team seeing which candidate best fits on all dimensions: knowledge, culture, likability, whatever else you put into this profile, and so forth. What else would you like to tell us about what this product accomplishes?
Aside from the main workflow of helping teams tackle this process a lot easier, one technology we introduced is our ability to quickly understand your team's needs. So as a manager, I led 2 teams, 18 engineers, and multiple projects. It's hard to keep in mind what everyone's doing at any given time. So being able to see visually what types of work is being done in your organization is going to be very useful. And we actually developed this because knowing that information, you're able to come up with job descriptions a lot more precisely, right? if you really care, the power users of our software will enter, their GitHub URL to figure out, hey, is there any blind spots in my team, right? But that piece of technology can enable other use cases, we believe. For instance, helping leadership to do this on an organizational level. Not just me doing it on a team level, but organizational level, where you can do maybe monthly reports on whether there's any silos in skill sets, right? People doing the same thing across the organization. If you have a need to reorganize, do you have the skill sets that can be tied together, right, in a new way? So we're thinking about having this enterprise offering where the tools that are being already used by engineers and managers can give leaders a very unique insight about their organization.
So Jake, when you use the term hire, you don't necessarily mean a new hire to the company. It could be a hire coming from another source within the company. So that's where this kind of horizontal look at your skills and what your needs are helps not just your particular organization, but the whole tech enterprise tech capability of the company, and use it more effective in a more effective way. The one thing I was going to say is that I know that when we were, I believe this actually was during your time when you were studying at Columbia, there was also a comparable individual. I shouldn't say comparable individual. There was another student there, like you, experienced in working and so forth, who was focused on just the training aspect once the person's been hired. Because I believe, and Deirdre, you would recall this, he had discovered there was a huge loss of productivity once the person's actually been hired in the training of the individual. And a part of what Jake is trying to solve is a better fit would reduce some of that. But there's still a training aspect. So there's a lot that goes on beyond the sourcing piece that is being done extremely well today. And there's a lot of competitive pressure in that market, and almost every company uses and benefits from those enterprise systems. And they're all names we would know. But you see it just and there are some of these competitors, and there are some small enterprises that are trying to solve these. But I believe when we went through the market analysis with you, and you have done extensive work on the marketplace, that you see the competition for the most part coming out of the structured side. So even the startup companies are coming out of the structured side rather than what you are doing, which is coming at it from the engineering leaders side. Mm-hmm. And the breakage is not just the team engineers, but it's also the engineering managers, because there are times when you want to use the managers as part of that enterprise, that hiring process, and you have to recruit them. And the harder the more breakage there is in this process, the less likely they were to easily be recruited, right? I mean, anytime, and I think you even mentioned to me that there are times that you recall where it wasn't really even articulated in your job description as a manager that this was part of what you had to do. Now, I think it was in your organization, but there are many that are not, and it's considered a job that is not a part of what your responsibilities are. So it makes it even more difficult, right? And
absolutely,
that whole subject is, when you're looking at the competition, that's the nub of the gap you see and you've seen. Did I describe
that's
that
exactly
right?
right? Yeah, Professor. That's exactly right. It's the whole aspect, right? Like the hiring piece takes up maybe even up to half of a team's time, right? And that's not our deliverables. We don't get measured. Our success, like getting promotions, has nothing to do with how we build our team. Uh, and 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 that causes a lot of frustration. And we believe that's the leading cause of employee burnout. And when I say employee, I'm including managers also, because the organization treats these activities as a uh, productivity hours is being lost, right? But as leaders, when you say, hey, what's been done, do you consider all of the, like hours spent on interviewing candidates? You don't, right? And I think that's the real kind of emotional gap uh, of that we see. Sorry, hopefully
No,
I'm.
no, I'm glad we're getting at it, because that is, I've never heard you quite articulate it that way, but that's really powerful, Jake. And I can understand it. Deirdre, it's your turn. I could keep going here. There's so much interesting about this marketplace.
Absolutely, but let's take a step forward from what Jake was just saying. So, given the gap, given the frustration and so forth, how would you identify your ideal target customer for the product?
When you say identify, do you mean how do I identify, or how are we going to capture the ideal customers?
Who in an organization would you see going in and talking with about purchasing your product?
Yeah, it'll be uh, it'll be engineering managers or engineering leads, uh, but we also expect the uh, engineers to be kind of helping us to get to the engineering managers who have the authority to purchase the software. At the same time, we are trying out a new funnel with leadership of these engineering organizations to say, hey, you have a tool that you can place in the hands of your managers that will help them, like save uh, hundreds of hours in engineering productivity, but also help you um, have this snapshot of all the types of work being done in your organization.
But let's make this absolutely explicit for the listeners that you're
Mhm.
not selling into HR. You're
Oh, we're
selling
not selling
to
it to HR.
individual managers.
That's right. We do have a solution that HR will champion. They do love. We're not saying, hey, we're butting heads with HR. That's not the case at all. In fact, when I talk to recruiters, they love our product because they also have been feeling on their end that this is not their job, right? To come up with a job description, and they have trouble influencing the engineering managers to do the right HR when they set policies, when they set cultural values for the whole company. They have trouble saying, "Hey, like your hiring process doesn't reflect this," right? So we're actually helping HR will champion us. So we can also market through them, but we're selling into engineering organizations.
So Jake, I know you know this, but maybe you could describe this to the folks that are watching this or listening to this. So one of the things we focus always on is that first customer. Where does that first customer come from? And what kind of a value exchange are you getting from that first customer? So spend a second for me on the whole question. This is a follow-on to what Professor Silberstein was just pushing on. Talk about your first customer and talk about how you acquired that customer, what you're doing for that customer, and what stage you're in solving what it is you've agreed to solve with them. and what kind of a value exchange you're getting from them, and either monetary or not monetary information, what that value exchange is and how you see that developing. And also, when you do, and I'm sorry, this is a multi-part question, but I know you understand this. When you move it, when you do, or you are end up to moving part of that value exchange into monetization, what does that monetization look like, and why is it priced the way it is? And who will actually do, to Deirdre's point, the buying and the paying for it, right? And the approving of it. So I know I've asked you a multi-part question here, but I know because this is something we focused on a lot, and perhaps you could take us through that whole thing.
Sure, yeah. So we're selling to engineering managers, and from my experience and from talking to many managers across the industry, we have the discretion to buy software for our team. And that budget is usually maybe up to $500 per month per software. So we are staying under that price point so that engineering managers can purchase it for their own teams. So we don't cost, tens of thousands of dollars that our competitors cost. That's one. And what we promise the managers for that money exchange is, hey, we help you save hundreds of thousands of dollars in engineering productivity, and your engineers will love you, right, for choosing this software, because it's helping you solve that critical frustration. Did that answer the question? Or?
So yeah, so now when your first customer, because you have a first customer, first, so how, I'm not going to ask you to name them, but what kind of a company is it, and how did you acquire that? Just so everybody understands that first customers are the most difficult customer you'll ever have, right? Is making that happen. And then what are you getting in return? What is that value exchange you're getting, and what are you giving them?
Sure. So the first customer was a acquaintance I knew, and for a while, and he is a startup founder, and at the time his company was going from C stage to Series A stage, and I ran into him in a cafe somewhere, and I was just trying to explain my business, and I said, hey, like, you're growing your team very quickly. You're going to have to grow your team very quickly. And as a founder, I assume you have this core team culture that you want to maintain as you grow, because up until now, you could be involved in every single hiring process, but now you're going to have to scale, right? I know you're using Greenhouse for your, sourcing of the candidates, putting the word out to get more candidates to apply. But how are you solving that problem of scaling your team culture, right? Like, is there a a systematic way that you're approaching this? And he actually immediately, jumped on, like, and said, hey, like, that is my biggest, actually, the biggest question I have right now is how to, like, beyond just, building out the product, how do I build my team, right? Because the team is the most important thing in a startup, and team is the one, team, what I think is technical team moat is a real thing these days. Technical moat isn't, but technical team moat is a real thing. So you want to build the team and then the right team culture. And he didn't really think the existing tools were solving his problem. So he was like, actually, I would be very happy to be a design client partner before you have a product. And the value exchange there was, because we don't have a product, we'll offer his entire company for a year uh, this package for $5,000 a year.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you solved what Professor Silberstein and I believe is one of the hardest things to solve, which is, who's your first customer? How did you acquire that, or acquiring that first customer, and creating a meaningful value exchange, meaning that you're providing something that they clearly see as value, and that they're willing to provide other things back to you. And in this case, you were even able to convince this founder to provide you some monetary value in return, which is usually pretty rare in that first customer. Usually that first customer, what they're doing is providing you information. They're providing you guidance, information, usage information about the product, and so forth. And you were able to do that. And since then, you've moved beyond that. We're not going to ask you to get into all that because there are too many other questions that we have, and Professor Silberstein is sitting there chomping at the bit to ask her next set of questions. Jake, so get ready. Here it comes.
Okay, Jake, you've identified your ideal customer, and this customer buys your product. Now, tell me how they're going to be using this product. What I'm slightly getting at here is you and I have had a number of conversations over the past month about not just the hiring, but also a possible extension of the product beyond the specific interviewing and hiring process. So you've got your ideal customer. How would you like this customer to use your product?
Yeah, no, I just want to clarify, the three of us, right, the professors and I, we talk about the next steps a lot. We try to look further down the road. So with our first customer, we are very focused on delivering the best experience with what we promised. And that itself will take some time, and that's what we will be selling as our first product. But and as users, right? Like although we have one client company, we have multiple users in that company, right? And those users tell us that the fact that they can collaborate on the role definition and have everything in one view of what everyone's going to be asking, and being able to have a single tool where you have all the questions in in an organized way is their biggest value. Further down the road, we would love to see them use this tool to gain other insights about their team that is actionable, and that save them time so that they can focus on delivering their projects.
Okay, what sorts of insights? Where would you see your tool useful?
Right. So identifying what kind of work clusters there are, because I think if you are in tech, in any technical organization that's big, you know that there's some you have technical silos developing, and organizations take a lot of time looking into it. Hey, like, do you have team A using, tech, like some database called A, and then team B using some database called A also, right? Should we look into like those teams and see like if the teams can be merged together so we don't have to like hire this for the same function? Previously, that's been done on a technology basis because that's what's identifiable, right? Using our technology, you don't need to do that extra step of, hey, like, let's get teams into the same room and like have them explain why they're like what they're doing with this technology is different. We are working on something that can tell us, hey, this team is working on streaming services, right? And this team is working on storage services, although they're using the same technology. So they're completely different functions, right? But you have these two other teams that are also doing streaming that might be a better match for merging together. Does that make sense? Like, we want to be able to give a better insight for the leadership of what everyone is working on so that there's more fluid organization within the company of skill sets.
Mhm.
So
Excellent.
Jake, so I have a question for you about building a tech company in Silicon Valley, because as you know, Professor Silberstein and I built too many companies to count on one hand, or two hands, but we've done them all on the West Coast or keep going across the Atlantic, right? We haven't done it this way, your way. What's it like these days to build a tech company in Silicon Valley? And I realize that you were there for Apple, you're there now, you're building this company there. And then if you could also get a little bit into the development of your own team and your own culture that you're building out with your company, which is called ByTeams. And notice we didn't talk about your company at all until we talked about the problem in depth and the opportunity in depth, the size of the market, the competition, exactly what people are needing. And then we started talking about your solution, your competitive nature, how you're going to sell into the company, how you're going to sell into the marketplace, the value exchange, how that works, who's going to buy, how much they are able to pay, and are they able to make this decision yourself, and the fact that you're fighting into a market that is heavily structured coming from one side, and you're going to be providing that from the other side, but at the same time, you're going to play nicely because these people have a lot of power and control in the organization. So that being said, and a lot of these structured companies are located where you are. Talk with me a little bit about how is it these days to build a tech company like yours, software, high tech in Silicon Valley, your own building of your own team and the culture.
Yeah, I mean, Silicon Valley is a great place to be, like many people know, because, and I think the biggest advantage is that there's a lot of founders just in the same coffee shops, in the same gyms, um, that are extremely open to helping each other out, and, you know, growing the pie. Uh, and 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 essentially just people you can like strike up a conversation in a coffee shop and learn from them, right? From how they're going about, you know, like identifying the funnels, like what they have tried, and especially because we are targeting technology companies, uh, a lot of these folks that I run into are, you know, like potential customers that I can learn from. Um, and that's been really powerful. Yeah, but of course, that's not to say, you know, you can't start companies elsewhere, because a lot of the meetings, actual meetings, although you might, you know, set up meetings in real life, actual meetings happen on Zoom. Uh, but yeah, so it's a great place to be. I met our founding members, Minji and Anurag. So Anurag, we met at Apple, uh, you know, in Silicon Valley. And Minji, you know, although I've known her since high school, we got to working together because she moved into the neighborhood, right? So we started talking again. So it is the best place to find learnings about building companies, best place to find customers, best place to find people to work with on your company. Uh, So it's really great. The only downside is it costs a lot.
Right, right. It costs a lot to live there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yes, which
yeah.
has always been the case. It just and the other areas, the East Coast is not the most inexpensive place from the corridor from Washington to Boston.
Right.
But it is a different culture of software company and software design. But so I'm going to let Professor Silberstein close things up for us because Jake, we've pushed you to an hour here, and I know you've got probably more important things to do than to talk with Professor Silberstein and me. But Deirdre, I'll let you have the last word here with Jake. And Jake, obviously, you may please tell us anything you would like. And just those who are watching this, you're probably seeing that Minji is here, but not on camera and not doing this. She is transiting at the moment. So she's not able to participate, but she is an important member of your team and wanted to at least be there for supporting you today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Deirdre and let Deirdre have the last word along with Jake.
So I'll just ask a question that sums up a lot of what we've been talking about, Jake. What would you like prospective customers to know about you, your product, and your approach to solving this issue?
Um, I mean, aside from what we do, I would like for prospective customers to know what we stand for. What we stand for is better teams, where team members feel like they're wasting less time on repetitive operations. And we want to really figure out all the ways we can empower these technical teams to focus on their real job and to get visibility in their organizations for the great work that they do.
Well, Jake, and also at at one point, your complete focus was on mindful hiring.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that was one of your when Deirdre was describing the path was towards mindful hiring, meaning carefully thought through, well constructed, complete hiring. There's Minji. Minji's been able to join us. So
Good.
Deirdre, I'm sorry I imposed my time, but it's good because Minji came on and I could just say hi.
Hi, Minji. Good to meet you.
Hello.
Is there
Nice
anything,
to
is there anything you'd like to contribute here? Anything you'd like to say to sort of sum up the conversation?
Ooh, right on the spot. Yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't keep my camera on because I didn't want to interrupt like the podcast. I wasn't sure if I was like, in it or not, but thank you so much for having me. And yeah, this was a wonderful conversation. I think it really summed up a lot of, the value that we could bring to the customers. So I really appreciate the opportunity. We really want to be serving our customers with a really great solution for them to increase their productivity, go with better hiring and ultimately better team operations. So that's what we really aim for. So really love all the conversation and thank you for everything.
Mhm.
You're welcome, Deirdre.
Very good. And we will give your contact information along with this video so that people who want to talk with you further know how to get in touch with you. Professor.
Yes, I'll have that listed at the bottom of the in the notes section of our videos. Jake, any other final comments, you, Minji, that you'd like to make before we sign off and let people have the rest of their day?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for having us, professors. I think your program was really critical in giving me the ability to start this company, to take the leap of faith from putting a great job at Apple and feeling like, hey, I have thought through this problem deeply enough to take this leap of faith. So I want to thank you for that, meeting with me on a weekly basis to help me sharpen my thoughts and also for the opportunity to come here and speak about the team building, team culture, what I think about that. It's been really great. Thank you.
Good. Well, good. Well, you're more than welcome, but you've returned everything to us that we want. We just love seeing people like you, Jake, being successful. That's the most important. And your friends, Minji and the rest, your dog and your wife and all. We want you all to be successful going forward. So with that, I'm just going to say goodbye to Deirdre and goodbye to you, Jake and Minji. It's great to see you all. And we will, Deirdre, you and I'll be back at it, I'm sure, tomorrow.
Yes, we will.
Okay, bye all.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bye.